At my husband's memorial dinner, my daughter-in-law raised her glass and said, "Margaret has had the house long enough." And the strangest thing was not that she said it, but that my son looked down at his plate and said nothing. The room went quiet in that polite Southern way, where people pretend they did not hear something cruel, because acknowledging it would make the cruelty real. I was 68 years old, sitting at the head of my own dining table in Lexington, Kentucky, surrounded by white roses, untouched casserole dishes, and relatives who had come to honor Thomas Whitaker, the man I had loved for 44 years. He had been buried 3 days earlier beneath a gray November sky, and I still had not moved his reading glasses from the nightstand. I still caught myself turning toward his chair whenever the furnace clicked on, expecting to see him there with his newspaper folded across one knee. Grief had made everything inside me quiet, almost hollow, but Ashley's voice cut through that silence like she had been waiting for the perfect moment. She sat beside my son Daniel, wearing a cream dress and a soft smile that never reached her eyes. To everyone else, Ashley was graceful, organized, the kind of daughter-in-law who sent thank you cards and remembered birthdays. To me, she had always been something more careful than kind. She had a way of touching Daniel's arm before he answered me, a way of stepping between us without ever seeming to move. For years, I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself every mother struggled when her only son married. I told myself a woman could not keep her child close forever. But that night, with Thomas gone and the table still smelling faintly of his favorite pot roast, I understood that Ashley had not been making space in the family. She had been taking mine. "I only mean," she continued, lowering her voice just enough to sound reasonable, "this place is too much for one woman. 5 bedrooms, 3 acres, property taxes, repairs. We all know Thomas handled the important things." A few forks shifted against plates. My sister Elaine looked at me with alarm, but she did not speak. Daniel cleared his throat, still staring down. "Mom, Ashley is just trying to be practical." Practical. That word had followed me through my whole life. Usually when someone wanted me to accept less than I deserved. It was practical to quit teaching when Daniel was born. Practical to put Thomas's business first. Practical to host every holiday, forgive every slight, smile through every disappointment because peace mattered more than pride. I placed my napkin beside my plate and looked at my son. He was 42 years old, with his father's brown eyes and my habit of rubbing his thumb along the edge of a glass when nervous. When he was little, he used to run into my classroom after school and hide behind my desk, asking if we could stop for ice cream on the way home. Now he sat 12 feet away from me and looked like a man waiting for permission from his wife to remember he had a mother. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" I asked. Ashley leaned back, as if she had expected the question and rehearsed the answer. "Daniel, and I think it would be healthiest for you to move into a smaller place. Maybe a senior apartment. Somewhere safe. Somewhere manageable." She smiled, then added, "We could move in here and keep the Whitaker name attached to the property." Thomas would have wanted that. For a moment, all I heard was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the one Thomas restored the first winter after we bought the house. We had sanded the floors ourselves, painted the kitchen twice, planted dogwoods along the driveway because I said spring should always arrive in white. Every room held proof that I had existed here, that I had loved here, sacrificed here, built a life one grocery list and mortgage payment and sleepless night at a time. And now Ashley was speaking as if I were an old chair that needed to be moved out before guests arrived. I looked around the table and saw the truth settle over every face. Some were embarrassed for me. Some were curious. Some were relieved it was not their problem. Daniel finally lifted his eyes. "It's not personal, Mom." That was when something inside me became very still. Not cold. Not angry in the way people expect anger to look. Just still. I folded my hands in my lap and let the silence stretch until Ashley's smile began to weaken. "I see," I said. 2 words. Small enough to pass as surrender. Large enough to hold every promise I made to myself in that moment. Ashley reached for her wine glass again, satisfied, probably believing she had won the first round in front of witnesses. Daniel exhaled as though the hardest part was over. But they did not know about the locked drawer in Thomas's study. They did not know about the envelope his attorney had asked me to open only when I felt pressured. They did not know that for the first time in my life, I was finished being practical for people who mistook my patience for weakness. I stood slowly, smoothing the front of my navy dress, and gave Ashley the same gentle smile she had been giving me for years. "You may be right," I said. "Perhaps it is time we discuss what belongs to whom." Her face changed then, only for a second, but I saw it. The flash of concern behind it. After the guests left, the house seemed to exhale around me. Chairs sat unevenly around the dining table. Half-empty glasses caught the yellow light from the chandelier. The white roses drooped in their vases as if they had grown tired of pretending this was still a memorial dinner and not the first quiet hearing in a war I had not asked to fight. I moved through the dining room slowly, stacking plates, folding napkins, scraping untouched food into the trash. Every ordinary motion felt strange. For 44 years, cleaning after family dinners had been part of the rhythm of my life. Thomas would loosen his tie, Daniel would help carry dishes when he was younger, and I would stand at the sink listening to the men talk about basketball or weather or the price of lumber. That night, there was no Thomas in the doorway, no soft joke from the hall, no hand on my shoulder telling me to leave the pans until morning. There was only the sound of water running and Ashley's words repeating in my mind. "We could move in here. Keep the Whitaker name attached to the property." As if my name had never been Whitaker too. As if I had merely borrowed it until someone younger wanted the key. I dried the last serving dish and opened the cabinet, then paused when I saw Thomas's favorite coffee mug sitting on the second shelf. Blue ceramic, cracked near the handle, useless to anyone else and priceless to me. I touched it with one finger and felt the grief rise again, not loud, not dramatic, just heavy enough to make breathing difficult. 3 days since the funeral, and already they were measuring rooms. I turned off the kitchen light and walked down the hallway toward the study. Thomas's study had always smelled faintly of cedar, printer paper, and the peppermint candies he kept in the top drawer. He had been a careful man, patient with numbers, steady with promises. The lamp on his desk still had a small dent in the brass shade from the day Daniel knocked it over with a baseball at age 9. I remembered Thomas laughing instead of scolding him, saying, "A house with no dents is a house where nobody really lived." I sat in his leather chair and rested my palms on the arms, feeling the worn places where his hands had been. The locked drawer was on the right side of the desk, beneath 3 shallow drawers filled with pens, old receipts, and business cards from people long retired. The key was in the small wooden box near the window, exactly where Thomas had always kept it. I had known about the drawer for years, but I had never opened it without him. Marriage, at least the kind I believed in, left room for privacy without suspicion. But that evening had changed something. Not in Thomas. In the people who thought his absence made me defenseless. The key slid in with a soft click. Inside was an envelope with my name written in his careful block letters. "Margaret, only if they pressure you." I stared at the handwriting until it blurred. There are moments when love arrives too late to hold your hand, but not too late to leave you a map. I opened the envelope and unfolded the papers inside. The first page was a letter from Thomas. He wrote that he had been worried about Daniel for several years, not because our son was cruel, but because he was easily led by anyone who spoke with enough confidence. He wrote that Ashley had asked too many questions about the deed, the savings accounts, the insurance policies, and whether I understood how expensive the house would be after his passing. He wrote that he did not want to frighten me while he was alive, but he had taken steps. The house was not Daniel's. It was not Ashley's. It was in a trust, and I was the sole person allowed to live there, sell it, rent it, or leave it to someone else. The bank accounts were protected. The life insurance had already been arranged so that no one could redirect it without my written approval in person. Attached behind the letter was a card from his attorney, Harold Benson, with a handwritten note asking me to call immediately if anyone mentioned moving, selling, or transferring property. I sat very still, the papers resting in my lap. Outside, a car passed slowly along the dark street, its headlights sliding across the wall and disappearing. For the first time since Thomas died, I felt something stronger than loss. I felt the shape of his protection around me, not as a rescue, as a reminder. I had not been left behind. I had been trusted. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the desk. Then I opened my phone. There were already 3 messages from Daniel. "Mom, Ashley thinks tonight got awkward. Mom, please do not take it the wrong way. Mom, we should talk tomorrow about next steps." I read each one without answering. Then a 4th message arrived, this time from Ashley. "Margaret, I hope you understand we are only trying to help. It would be easier if you did not make this emotional. I smiled at the word easier. Of course she wanted Easy. Easy was an old woman too tired to ask questions. Easy was a grieving widow embarrassed into silence. Easy was everyone assuming that kindness and weakness were the same thing. I placed the phone face down on Thomas's desk, reached for Harold Benson's card, and set it beside the lamp where I would see it first thing in the morning. Then I walked upstairs to the bedroom I had shared with my husband, past his reading glasses on the nightstand, and stood in front of the mirror. My silver hair was pinned loosely. My eyes looked tired, but not broken. Ashley had made one mistake at dinner. She had spoken too soon. And now, because she believed the battle had begun at that table, she had no idea it had actually begun years before, inside a locked drawer she never knew existed. Morning came quietly, with pale winter lights spreading across the bedroom floor, and the house holding the kind of silence that only follows a death and a decision. I woke before 6, not because I had slept well, but because my body still remembered the years when Thomas rose early and started coffee before the sun touched the windows. For a few seconds, I lay still and reached across the bed out of habit. The sheet beside me was smooth and cold. Then I remembered the dinner, the envelope, Ashley's smile, Daniel's lowered eyes, and the day settled over me all at once. I got dressed carefully, not for mourning, not for company, for myself. A gray wool skirt, a white blouse, pearl earrings Thomas had given me on our 30th anniversary, and low black shoes polished enough to remind me I was still a woman who knew how to stand upright. In the kitchen, I made coffee and toast, then sat at the small breakfast table overlooking the back garden. The dogwoods were bare now, their branches thin against the Kentucky sky. I thought of the spring they would bloom again, and I wondered whether Ashley had already imagined herself hosting brunch beneath those trees, telling neighbors how generous she had been to let poor Margaret settle somewhere smaller. The thought did not hurt as much as it should have. It clarified things. At 8:15, I called Harold Benson. His assistant recognized my name immediately and put me through without the usual polite delay. Harold's voice came on the line, older than I remembered, but steady. "Margaret, I am sorry for your loss. Thomas was a good man." I thanked him, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then I said, "They brought up the house last night." The silence that followed was short, but it told me enough. "Who brought it up?" he asked. "Ashley." Daniel supported her. Harold exhaled slowly. I was afraid of that. He did not sound surprised. That was the first small confirmation. The second came when he asked whether they had mentioned senior housing, property taxes, maintenance, or preserving the family name. I looked down at my untouched toast. Almost word for word. Harold asked me to come to his office at 10:30 and bring the envelope, my identification, and any written messages from Daniel or Ashley. He spoke gently, but each instruction was exact. Print the messages if you can. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to a family meeting without me present. Do not let anyone remove documents from the house. When I hung up, the kitchen seemed sharper around the edges. The clock, the coffee cup, the folded dish towel near the sink. Ordinary things looked different when you realized they might become evidence of the life someone was trying to erase. I went to Thomas's study and made copies of the letter, the trust summary, and the attorney's card. The printer hummed softly, too loud in the quiet room. While it worked, I opened Daniel's messages again. There was another one from him, sent at 7:42. "Mom, Ashley and I can stop by this afternoon to help you start sorting Dad's office." That was the first time my hand trembled. Not because I was afraid of them, but because they had aimed directly for the room where Thomas had protected me. I did not answer. Instead, I printed every message and placed the pages in a plain manila folder. Then I walked through the house, checking doors, cabinets, and drawers with a calmness that surprised me. In the dining room, Ashley had left her beige scarf draped over the back of a chair, as if she already belonged there. I picked it up with 2 fingers, folded it neatly, and set it by the front door. That was when I noticed something tucked under the edge of the centerpiece. A small white card from the memorial arrangement, half hidden beneath fallen rose petals. The handwriting was Ashley's. "Daniel, do not let her delay. The realtor said timing matters." I read it once. Then again. The words did not shout. They did not need to. They proved that last night had not been an emotional conversation after a funeral. It had been a step in a plan. I placed the card in the folder with the messages, then stood for a moment in the dining room where Thomas's family had eaten, mourned, and quietly watched my future being discussed as if I had already surrendered it. At 10 o'clock, I backed my old Buick out of the garage and drove 22 minutes across Lexington to Harold's office. The city moved around me as usual: school buses, grocery stores, people carrying coffee into work, lives continuing without knowing mine had divided into before and after. Harold's office was in a brick building near Main Street, with dark green shutters and a brass sign that had not changed in 20 years. He met me at the door himself. His hair had gone nearly white, and he held his cane in one hand, but his eyes were clear. When he saw the folder in my hands, his expression hardened with quiet understanding. "Come in, Margaret," he said. "I think it is time you know everything Thomas prepared." I stepped inside, and for the first time since the funeral, I did not feel like a grieving widow being moved from room to room by other people's decisions. I felt like a woman arriving exactly where her husband had expected her to be. Harold's office smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and the faint coffee he always seemed to keep warming somewhere behind his desk. He closed the door gently after me, as if the hallway itself did not need to hear what Thomas had left behind. I sat in the same leather chair I had occupied years earlier when Thomas updated our wills after Daniel's wedding. Back then, Ashley had been new to the family, bright and charming, with a laugh that made people turn toward her. I remembered how she had praised the house, touching the staircase banister with polished fingertips and saying, "This place has so much history." I had taken it as a compliment. Now I wondered whether she had been admiring a home or calculating a future. Harold opened the folder I brought and read Thomas's letter first. He did not interrupt himself with sympathy. He simply read, slowly, carefully, the way a man reads something written by a friend who knew trouble was coming. Then he examined the messages, the small white card, and the note about the realtor. When he looked up, there was no surprise in his face anymore. Only confirmation. "Margaret," he said, "Thomas came to me 18 months ago because he was concerned Ashley had begun asking questions she had no reason to ask." I kept my hands folded around my purse strap. "What kind of questions?" Harold leaned back and removed his glasses. Whether Daniel would inherit the house automatically. Whether a surviving spouse could be declared unable to manage property. Whether life insurance could be redirected if family expenses required it. She never asked me directly, of course. She asked Thomas at dinner, at birthdays, in those casual ways people use when they do not want their interest noticed. I stared at the edge of Harold's desk, at a thin scratch in the dark wood. My mind returned to all the little moments I had dismissed. Ashley standing in the doorway of Thomas's study with 2 cups of tea. Ashley offering to organize our old financial files because clutter made her anxious. Ashley telling Daniel, loud enough for me to hear, that older people sometimes needed help before they realized it themselves. Each memory clicked into place, not like thunder, but like a lock turning. Harold slid a document across the desk. "Thomas created the Whitaker Family Residence Trust. The house is protected. You have lifetime control. No one can force you out, sell it from under you, or move in without your written consent. Not Daniel. Not Ashley. Not any court petition based on ordinary grief or age." I touched the paper but did not pick it up. The words were clear, but the emotion behind them was harder to hold. Thomas had seen this coming. Thomas, who had squeezed my hand through church services and called Daniel every Sunday. Thomas, who had seemed so tired near the end, but still found enough strength to protect me from the very people sitting at our table. "Why did he not tell me?" I asked. My voice came out softer than I expected. Harold's expression gentled. "Because he hoped he was wrong. And because he knew you. You would have tried to fix it while he was still alive. You would have invited them over, cooked their favorite meal, and asked everyone to be honest. He did not want you begging people to love you properly." I looked toward the window. Outside, a woman in a red coat hurried along the sidewalk with a paper cup in her hand. The world was busy with errands and appointments, while I sat inside realizing my husband had understood my kindness better than I had. Harold continued, "There is more." He opened another file, thicker than the first. Thomas also adjusted the business shares. Daniel still receives a portion, but only under conditions. If he or anyone acting with him attempts to pressure you into leaving the residence, challenging the trust, or transferring assets under emotional distress, his distribution can be delayed or reduced. Thomas called it a dignity clause. I almost smiled, though my eyes burned. Dignity. That sounded like Thomas. Not revenge. Not punishment. Just a line drawn around me when I might be too tired to draw it myself. Harold handed me a tissue without making a comment. I appreciated that. I had no patience left for people who treated tears like weakness. They were not weakness. They were proof that I had loved honestly in a room full of people who had learned to negotiate affection. What should I do now? I asked. Harold placed the documents back in order. First, say nothing about the trust until we choose the moment. Second, allow them to put their intentions in writing if they are foolish enough to do so. Third, do not meet them alone if the conversation involves property, money, or your future living arrangements. And fourth, consider whether you want Daniel warned privately before Ashley pulls him any deeper. Daniel. His name settled between us like a photograph laid on a table. I could see him at 6 years old, missing his front tooth, bringing me a dandelion bouquet from the backyard. I could see him at 16, slamming doors, then coming back later to apologize because Thomas had taught him that pride was easier to swallow before it hardened. I could see him the night before his wedding, telling me Ashley made him feel important. Maybe that was the hook she found in him. My son had always wanted approval from the brightest person in the room, and Ashley had learned to shine directly in his eyes. I do not know if Daniel is lost, I said, or just afraid. Harold nodded. Those are different things. But the law can protect you while your heart figures out which one is true. I gathered the copies into my folder. Before I left, Harold gave me one more envelope, sealed and marked with Thomas's initials. He asked me to give you this only after our first meeting, if circumstances proved his concerns were real. I held it against my chest, but did not open it in the office. Some messages deserved the privacy of home. When I stepped outside, the air was cold enough to sting my cheeks. My phone buzzed before I reached the car. Daniel again. Mom, we are coming by at 4. Ashley says the realtor can give us an informal estimate, just so everyone understands the options. I looked at the message for a long moment. Then I typed my first reply since the dinner. 4 is fine. Please bring Ashley. There are things we should discuss together. I sent it, unlocked my Buick, and placed Thomas's unopened envelope on the passenger seat. For the first time, I was not waiting to see what they would do to me. I was inviting them to show me exactly who they were. I drove home with Thomas's sealed envelope on the passenger seat and both hands steady on the wheel. The city looked ordinary in the late morning light, but every red light felt like a pause before something I could no longer postpone. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the Buick for a full minute and looked at the house. White columns, black shutters, the wide front porch Thomas had rebuilt after a spring storm tore loose the old railing. From the street, it looked peaceful, almost untouched by grief. That was the trick of houses. They could hold decades of laughter, worry, sacrifice, and disappointment behind clean windows, and no one passing by would ever know what had been said at the dining table the night before. I carried the envelope inside and placed it on the kitchen table beside a cup of tea I forgot to drink. For a while, I did not open it. Instead, I walked from room to room, not searching for anything, just remembering. In the living room, Daniel had taken his first steps between the sofa and Thomas's knees. In the hallway, I had measured his height against the door frame every birthday until he asked me to stop because he was too old for childish things. In the guest room, Ashley had stayed one Christmas after a snowstorm made the roads unsafe, and I had given her my warmest quilt because she said the house felt drafty. I remembered how she thanked me in front of everyone, then later told Daniel she could not believe we had not updated the windows. I had laughed it off. I had laughed off many things. Women of my generation were taught to keep the peace until peace became another word for disappearing. At noon, I finally opened Thomas's envelope. Inside was not a legal document, but a letter, for pages in his handwriting. My dear Margaret, if you are reading this, then I was right about more than I wanted to be. I am sorry for that. I sat down before my knees could remind me of my age. The letter was not dramatic. Thomas had never been a dramatic man. He wrote plainly, gently, with the same careful honesty he used when explaining difficult things. He told me he had overheard Ashley telling Daniel that after he was gone, I would be too sentimental to handle practical decisions. He wrote that Daniel had not agreed with her at first, but he also had not defended me strongly enough. He wrote that our son loved me, but love without courage could still leave a person alone. I read that sentence 3 times. Love without courage could still leave a person alone. Then Thomas wrote something that made the room seem to tilt. 6 months before his diagnosis worsened, Ashley had asked him whether putting me in a smaller apartment would protect the family assets. Not protect me, protect the assets. Thomas had asked what she meant, and she had smiled, apparently embarrassed, and said she only worried about me being overwhelmed. But he knew. He had always known more than he said. The final page was shorter. Margaret, do not beg them to see your worth. Do not argue with people who already know the truth and hope you are too tired to speak it. Let them reveal themselves. Then choose peace, but choose it from strength, not surrender. I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. The tears came then, quietly, without apology. Not because I was weak, because I had been loved by a man who saw the storm forming and built me shelter before it reached the door. At 2:30, I made one more copy of everything and placed the originals in the small fireproof safe Thomas kept in the hall closet. At 3, I changed into a dark green dress, simple and neat, and pinned my hair back. I set 3 glasses of water on the coffee table and placed Ashley's beige scarf beside the front door where she would see it. At 3:45, I called Harold and put him on notice that Daniel and Ashley were coming with talk of a realtor. He told me to keep my phone recording only if Kentucky law allowed it, and then reminded me that Kentucky is a one-party consent state. Still, he advised me not to bait them, not to threaten them, not to sound angry. Just ask questions, he said. People like Ashley often mistake questions for permission to keep talking. By 4, the house was so quiet I could hear the old clock ticking in the hallway. At 4:12, Daniel's silver pickup pulled into the driveway, followed by a white sport utility vehicle I did not recognize. Ashley stepped out first, wearing dark sunglasses though the sky had turned cloudy. Daniel came around the truck more slowly. Behind them, a man in a navy jacket climbed out of the white vehicle carrying a slim folder. So she had brought the realtor after all. Not a suggestion, not an informal family talk. A planned visit. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. Ashley's smile appeared immediately, smooth as frosting over a cracked cake. Margaret, she said, leaning in as if she meant to kiss my cheek. I stepped back just enough that she had to stop. Your scarf is by the door, I said. Her eyes flicked toward it, then back to me. A small irritation passed over her face and vanished. Daniel looked tired. Guilty, perhaps, or simply uncomfortable that the errand was not going as easily as promised. Mom, he said, we just thought it might help to understand what the house is worth. I looked past him to the man with the folder. And you are? Craig Miller, he said, offering a business card. I am with Bluegrass Premier Realty. I was told the family was considering a potential listing. The family, that word again, stretched wide enough to include everyone except the woman who owned the decision. I took his card but did not invite him to sit. Who told you that? Craig glanced at Ashley. Ashley laughed softly. I said potential, Margaret. No one is forcing anything. I turned to Daniel. Did you tell this man I agreed to discuss selling my home? Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. Ashley answered for him. We are only gathering information. You do not have to make everything confrontational. There it was. The same old trick. Name my boundaries as conflict. Name her pressure as help. I stepped aside and allowed them into the foyer, but not beyond it. Ashley looked toward the staircase, the living room, the study door. Her eyes moved quickly, inventorying. Craig shifted awkwardly, beginning to sense this was not the appointment he had expected. Before anyone discusses value, I said, keeping my voice even, I would like to understand something. Ashley, when did you first contact Mr. Miller? She blinked. That is not really important. It is important to me. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Mom, please. I did not look away from Ashley. Her smile tightened. Last week. Just to ask general questions. Last week. Thomas had been alive last week. Weak, sleeping more, but alive. The words landed softly, but the room changed. Daniel looked at her then. Really looked. Last week, he asked. Ashley's eyes flashed toward him. Daniel, do not start. I was trying to be prepared. I nodded once, slowly, and reached into the folder I had left on the small table near the stairs. I took out the white card from the memorial arrangement and held it between 2 fingers. Prepared, I said. Is that what you meant when you wrote that the realtor said timing matters? Craig's face went pale with embarrassment. Daniel stared at the card as though it had appeared from nowhere. Ashley did not move. For the first time since I had known her, she had no ready smile waiting. I placed the card on the table, Not dramatically, not with anger. Just flat, where everyone could see it. I said, we should all go into the living room now. There are things about this house you need to hear, and I would prefer you hear them while sitting down. The living room had never felt smaller. Ashley sat on the edge of the cream sofa with her purse clutched in both hands, her posture perfect, her expression carefully arranged. Daniel lowered himself into the armchair across from me, the same chair where his father used to read on Sunday afternoons. Craig Miller remained near the doorway, looking as though he wished he had confirmed the appointment more carefully before stepping into a family matter dressed as a real estate conversation. I placed the folder on the coffee table between us and sat in Thomas's chair. Not because I wanted to prove a point, because it steadied me. The leather was worn where his elbows had rested for years, and I could almost hear him telling me to take my time. Ashley spoke first, because silence had always made her impatient. Margaret, this is getting unnecessarily tense. Craig only came because Daniel and I thought knowing the market value would help you make responsible choices. I looked at her hands. Her knuckles were pale around the strap of her purse. Responsible choices, I repeated. Like contacting a realtor while my husband was still alive. Daniel flinched. Ashley turned toward him immediately. I told you, Daniel, I was trying to prepare. Your mother is twisting this. There it was again. Not an apology. A correction. People like Ashley did not admit to pushing. They only accused you of standing in the wrong place. I opened the folder and removed a copy of the trust summary, keeping Thomas's personal letter hidden beneath it. That letter was not for Ashley. Some things remained sacred even in the middle of betrayal. This house is not available for an informal estimate, a potential listing, or a family discussion about transfer, I said. My voice sounded calm enough that even I was surprised by it. Thomas placed it in the Whitaker Family Residence Trust. I have lifetime control. No one can sell it, occupy it, list it, or pressure me to leave without my written consent. Craig's eyes widened slightly. He looked at Daniel, then Ashley, then back at me. Mrs. Whitaker, I apologize. I was not told there was a trust issue. There is no issue, I said. There is a trust. Ashley leaned forward. That does not mean you should stay here alone forever. Legal paperwork is one thing, but reality is another. You are grieving. You are vulnerable. Everyone can see that. The word vulnerable slipped out of her mouth too smoothly, like a term she had practiced. I watched Daniel then. His face had changed. Not fully, not enough to call it courage, but enough to show discomfort had become doubt. Ashley, he said quietly, you told me Mom and Dad had already talked about downsizing. She did not answer right away. That pause told him more than any confession would have. They did talk about it, she said finally. In general terms. I looked at Daniel. Your father and I talked about many things. We talked about replacing the roof. We talked about taking a trip to Charleston when he felt stronger. We talked about planting more dogwoods along the back fence. We did not talk about me leaving my home 3 days after his funeral so you and Ashley could move in. Daniel lowered his eyes again, but this time it looked less like avoidance and more like shame. Craig cleared his throat. I think I should excuse myself. Ashley stood quickly. Craig, that is not necessary. It is, he said, with professional stiffness. I do not evaluate properties without clear authorization from the legal decision-maker. Mrs. Whitaker, again my apologies. He handed me another card, nodded once, and left with the kind of speed that told me he had no intention of being dragged into a dispute. The front door closed behind him, and the click echoed through the house. Ashley remained standing. Without Craig there, her polish thinned. Do you realize how humiliating that was? She asked. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the words sounded so misplaced in her mouth. Humiliation, to Ashley, was being corrected in front of a realtor. To me, it was hearing my life measured at my husband's memorial dinner while relatives stared into their plates. Yes, I said. I do. Daniel looked up. Mom, I did not know about the trust. No, I said gently. You did not ask. That hurt him. I saw it land, but I did not soften it. A mother can love her child and still refuse to cushion every truth before handing it to him. Ashley turned on him. Do not let her make this about you. We were trying to help. Were we? Daniel asked. His voice was still quiet, but there was a crack in it now. Because you called the realtor last week. Dad was still alive. Ashley's cheeks colored. Your father was not getting better. Someone had to think ahead. I opened the folder again and took out the printed messages. Then let us think ahead clearly. This morning, you asked to come help sort Thomas's office. Yesterday, you pushed the idea of senior housing. Last week, you contacted a realtor. And at the memorial dinner, you told a table full of grieving people that I had lived here long enough. Ashley crossed her arms. That is not what I meant. It is what you said. The room went quiet. Not polite this time. Exposed. The grandfather clock ticked in the hall, steady and indifferent. Daniel reached for the printed messages, then stopped, as if he was not sure he had the right. I slid them toward him. He read them slowly, his expression tightening with each line. Ashley watched him with sharp eyes. Daniel, she warned. He did not look at her. That was the first real shift. Small, almost invisible, but I saw it. A son who had looked down at his plate the night before was finally looking at the paper in front of him. Mom, he said, I am sorry. The words were not enough. Not yet. But they were the first honest words he had spoken since Thomas died. Ashley made a small sound of disbelief. Unbelievable. You are apologizing because she kept a few messages and turned this into a courtroom. I folded my hands in my lap. No courtroom, Ashley. Not today. Today is just a living room. But if you continue trying to interfere with this house, my finances, or my right to make my own decisions, Harold Benson will handle the next conversation. Her face changed at Harold's name. So she knew him, or she knew enough to fear what an attorney meant. Daniel noticed too. His eyes moved from her face to mine. Harold knows about this. Your father made sure he would. The sentence settled over us like a door closing. Ashley picked up her purse. Her voice dropped into something colder. You are making a mistake, Margaret. Families should work things out privately. I stood then, slowly, with no anger in my movement. Families should not plan around a widow before the flowers from her husband's funeral have wilted. For once, she had no answer. Daniel remained seated, staring at the papers. Ashley walked to the foyer, took her scarf from the table, and opened the door hard enough to let in a slice of cold air. She expected Daniel to follow. He did not. That was when I understood the battle had changed shape. It was no longer Ashley pushing me out. It was Ashley realizing she might not be able to take my son with her. Daniel stayed in the armchair after Ashley left, both hands resting on the printed messages as if they were heavier than paper. Through the front window, I saw her standing beside the white sport utility vehicle, one hand pressed to her phone, her mouth moving quickly. Even from inside, I could recognize the shape of her anger. It was controlled, elegant, almost invisible unless you had spent years watching it pass behind her eyes. Daniel did not look outside. He kept staring at the coffee table where the trust papers, text messages, and white memorial cards sat in a neat line between us. I wanted to comfort him. That instinct rose in me before thought could stop it. He was my son, my only child. The boy who once brought home a spelling test with a gold star and held it up like he had won the Kentucky Derby. The teenager who called me from college because he had burned chicken in a skillet and did not know how to get the smell out of his apartment. But he was also the man who had sat beside his wife while she told me I had lived in my own home long enough. Both things were true, and the truth did not become kinder just because it was complicated. How long has she been talking about the house? I asked. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. A few months. Maybe longer. I did not think it was serious. What did you think it was? He swallowed. Planning. Worrying. She said you would be overwhelmed after Dad passed. She said if we waited too long, you would get attached to staying here, and it would be harder on everyone. Harder on everyone. Not harder on me. Everyone. That word had become a curtain people pulled over selfishness when they wanted it to look like concern. I leaned back in Thomas's chair and let the silence do what my voice did not need to do. Daniel finally looked at me, and his eyes were wet, but not yet brave. Mom, I should have stopped her last night. Yes, I said. His face tightened, but I did not take the word back. I kept thinking she knew more than I did, he said. About finances, the estate, what Dad wanted. She was so certain. Certainty is not the same as truth. He nodded slowly, as if the sentence had to travel through several years of marriage before reaching him. Outside, Ashley opened the driver's door, then slammed it shut without getting in. Daniel flinched at the sound. That tiny movement told me more than he intended. Are you afraid of disappointing her? I asked. He looked startled. No. I do not know. She can make things very difficult when she feels unsupported. Unsupported. Another softened word. I thought of all the softened words women use to survive uncomfortable homes. Difficult, moody, particular, sensitive. Words that did not accuse, but quietly explained why everyone walked carefully. I looked at my son and saw that Ashley had not only pushed me aside, she had trained him to confuse peace with obedience. Daniel, I said, keeping my voice gentle, I am not asking you to choose between your wife and your mother today. I am asking you to choose between what is true and what is convenient. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he picked up the white card again. Daniel, do not let her delay. The realtor said timing matters. His thumb brushed over Ashley's handwriting. I did not know about this. I believe you. His eyes lifted. You do? I believe you did not know everything. That is not the same as being innocent. The words hurt him. I could see that. But I had learned in the last 24 hours that a truth spoken calmly can do more than 100 angry accusations. Daniel set the card down and stood, walking toward the fireplace mantel. The framed photograph from his wedding sat beside one of Thomas holding him as a newborn. Ashley in white lace. Daniel smiling as if the future had opened wide in front of him. I remembered that day clearly. Ashley had hugged me in front of the guests and whispered, "Thank you for raising such a good man." I had felt proud, grateful, included. Later, when the photographer arranged family pictures, Ashley quietly suggested we take one with just the new Whitaker family. I had stepped aside, telling myself it was normal for a bride to want things her way. That was how it began, not with a door slammed in my face, with a small step to the side, then another, until I was standing outside my own family, still smiling so no one would feel uncomfortable. Daniel touched the wedding photograph, but did not pick it up. She said you never accepted her. I looked at his back. Did you believe that? He did not answer right away. Sometimes. I nodded, though he could not see me, because I stopped arguing for a place she had already decided I should not have. He turned then. Mom, I am sorry. This time, the words sounded different. Less like panic, more like recognition. I stood and gathered the papers, sliding them back into the folder. Sorry is a beginning. It is not a repair. He looked down. What do you want me to do? I glanced toward the window. Ashley was still outside, pacing near the vehicle, waiting for him to come out and become the man she could steer again. I want you to go home with your wife, I said. Daniel looked surprised. After all this? Yes. Go home. Listen carefully. Do not defend me with a speech you do not yet have the strength to stand behind. Just listen. Ask yourself what she says when she no longer thinks I am in the room. His mouth opened, then closed. He understood. Maybe not fully, but enough. I handed him a copy of Thomas's trust summary. Keep this. Not to use against her. To remind yourself that your father did not leave confusion behind. Other people created it. Daniel took the pages carefully. At the front door, he paused with his hand on the knob. Did Dad know I was this weak? The question nearly broke me, but I answered the way Thomas would have wanted me to. Your father knew you were still becoming the man he hoped you would be. Daniel's face folded with grief he had not allowed himself to feel. Then he stepped onto the porch. Ashley stopped pacing the moment she saw him, her expression shifting into wounded disbelief before he had said a single word. I watched through the glass as she spoke quickly, one hand gesturing toward the house, then toward the street, then back at him. Daniel did not interrupt. He did not nod. He only listened. For Ashley, that was a dangerous new silence. When they drove away, I locked the door and returned to the living room. The house felt different again. Not safe exactly. Not healed, but awake. I picked up Thomas's letter from the side table and read the final line one more time. Let them reveal themselves. Then choose peace, but choose it from strength, not surrender. I folded the page and placed it over my heart. Ashley thought the battle was between two women fighting for control of one man and one house. She was wrong. The real battle was between the version of me she had counted on and the woman Thomas had trusted me to remember. The evening after Daniel left, I did something I had not done since Thomas became ill. I cooked dinner for one and sat at the dining table instead of eating over the sink. A small bowl of vegetable soup, 2 slices of buttered bread, and a cup of tea. Nothing fancy, nothing anyone would photograph or praise. But it felt like an act of return. For months, the table had been a place of medicine schedules, condolence cards, and conversations whispered around fear. The night before, Ashley had tried to turn it into a place where my future could be negotiated without my consent. So I reclaimed it in the quietest way I knew. I placed a cloth napkin beside my bowl. I lit one candle. I looked at Thomas's empty chair and said, "I am still here." The words sounded small in the room, but they steadied me. At 7:30, my phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was low, tired. "Mom, can I come by tomorrow morning?" I looked toward the dark window, where my reflection hovered over the glass like an older woman watching from another life. "Is Ashley coming?" "No," he said. Then, after a pause, "She does not know I am calling." That sentence told me the night had gone exactly as Harold expected. I did not ask for details. "Not yet. Come at 9, I said. "We can talk in the kitchen." After we hung up, I carried my bowl to the sink and washed it slowly. Outside, the wind moved through the bare dogwoods, brushing branches against branches like old bones of memory. I slept better than I expected, not deeply, but without the sharp panic that had been waking me since Thomas entered hospice. In the morning, I made coffee and set out 2 mugs. Daniel arrived at 9:13, wearing the same jacket from the day before and the expression of a man who had heard things he could not unknow. He stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. "She was furious," he said before I could ask. "Not sad, not embarrassed. Furious." I poured coffee into his mug. "About what?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "That you had paperwork. That Dad planned ahead. That I looked at her like I did not recognize her." I slid the mug toward him and sat across from him at the kitchen table. He looked around the room as if seeing it from a great distance. The curtains I had sewn 20 years earlier. The rooster clock Thomas bought as a joke during a trip to Gatlinburg. The worn place near the back door where Daniel used to kick off muddy sneakers. "She said you poisoned me against her," he continued. "She said you had been waiting for Dad to die so you could turn me into your little boy again." I kept my hands around my coffee cup. The words were ugly, but ugliness loses some power when it is finally said aloud. "And what did you think?" Daniel looked down. "I thought about Dad." His voice caught there, and he swallowed hard. "I thought about how he never rushed decisions. How he would sit with something for days before saying one sentence that made everything clear. And I kept. Hearing him ask me, 'Son, who benefits if you stop asking questions?' That sounded so much like Thomas that I had to look away for a second. Daniel reached into his jacket and removed a folded stack of papers. I checked our email last night. Ashley had been talking with Craig Miller for almost 2 months. Not 1 week. 2 months. She sent him photos of the house from Thanksgiving, from Christmas, even from Dad's birthday dinner. She told him we were expecting to list quickly after a family transition. Family transition. I closed my eyes briefly. Thomas had been sitting in his recliner at his birthday dinner, weaker but smiling as Daniel carried in the cake. Ashley had been taking pictures of my living room for a realtor while we sang to a dying man. I opened my eyes and found Daniel watching me, shame written across his face. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I know that is not enough." "I know." I nodded. "No, it is not enough. But it matters that you know it is not enough." He accepted that without defending himself. That was new. Then he took out his phone and placed it on the table. "There is more. She texted her sister last night. I saw the messages because her tablet is still linked to her phone. I was not snooping at first. It popped up while she was in the shower." He stopped, then corrected himself. "No, that is not true. After I saw the first message, I looked. I chose to look." I appreciated the honesty. "What did it say?" Daniel's jaw tightened. Her sister asked if the old lady signed anything yet. The kitchen seemed to go very still. Not because I was surprised. Because there are certain kinds of disrespect that still sting even when you have prepared yourself for them. And Ashley wrote back, "Not yet, but Daniel is close. Once Margaret is in a smaller place, the rest gets easier." He pushed the phone toward me, but I did not touch it. I did not need to. His face was enough. "Send copies to Harold," I said. "This morning." Daniel nodded. "I already did." He replied that he wants to meet with us at noon. Us. The word held weight. I studied my son across the table. He looked older than he had 2 days ago. Not because of age, but because illusion had left him, and illusion often takes comfort with it when it goes. "Daniel," I said, "whatever happens between you and Ashley is your marriage. I will not manage it for you. I will not become the excuse you use to avoid hard choices." He nodded again, slower this time. "I understand. But my home, my finances, and my dignity are no longer open for discussion. His eyes lifted to mine. They should never have been. That was the first sentence that sounded like repair. Small, unfinished, but real. At noon, we sat in Harold Benson's office, side by side instead of across a battlefield. Harold reviewed the emails, the messages, the realtor contact, and Ashley's written pressure. He explained the trust again, this time with Daniel listening to every word. Then he told us Thomas had added one final provision. If any family member attempted to manipulate or coerce me into leaving the residence, they would lose access to future discretionary distributions connected to the property. Daniel closed his eyes when he heard it. Not angry, not cheated, just humbled. Harold folded his hands. Your father did not write this to punish you. He wrote it to protect your mother from the moment you might forget to. Daniel looked at me then, and for once, he did not look like a husband caught between two women. He looked like a son sitting beside his mother after finally seeing the chair she had been forced to sit in alone. My phone buzzed in my purse. A message from Ashley. Margaret, we need to talk privately before this gets out of hand. I read it once, then showed it to Harold. He took off his glasses and gave the smallest smile. No, he said. Now she talks to me. Harold did not send Ashley a long letter. He sent 3 pages, plain and exact, the kind of language that leaves no room for charm to squeeze through. It stated that I was the sole controlling resident of the Whitaker home, that no evaluation, listing, transfer, or relocation discussion would take place without my written consent and legal representation, and that any further pressure directed at me could affect Daniel's future distributions under Thomas's trust. He copied Daniel on the message. He did not copy me by mistake. He wanted Ashley to know I was no longer standing alone in my kitchen, trying to be polite while people moved my life around like furniture. By 5 that afternoon, she called Daniel 14 times. I knew because he placed his phone face down on Harold's conference table and let each call pass into silence. The buzzing sounded small at first, then almost pitiful. Not because Ashley was pitiful, but because control always looks less powerful when no one rushes to answer it. Daniel stared at the phone as if every vibration pulled at a habit he was trying not to obey. Harold watched him without judgment. I did the same. There are moments when a mother must not rescue her child from discomfort, because discomfort may be the first honest teacher he has had in years. Finally, Daniel turned the phone off. The room became quiet. He looked at me and said, I need to go home and tell her this stops. I nodded. Then go home and tell her calmly. He stood, then hesitated. Will you be all right tonight? The question touched me more than I expected. Not because I needed him to protect me, but because he had finally remembered to ask. Yes, I said. I will be in my own home. That evening, I drove back through Lexington as the sky turned purple over the bare trees. I stopped at Kroger for milk, eggs, and a bunch of yellow tulips that had no reason to be in season and no business making me smile, but they did. At home, I put them in a clear vase on the dining table, right where the white memorial roses had started to wilt. I did not throw Thomas's flowers away yet. I moved them to the sideboard, trimmed the stems, changed the water, and let them remain a little longer. Grief did not need to be rushed out to make room for strength. They could stand in the same room. At 7:20, Daniel called. His voice was rough. She admitted it, he said. I sat down slowly. What did she admit? Not everything at first. She said she was protecting our future. Then she said Dad was selfish for tying everything up. Then she said you were manipulating me with grief. I asked her why she contacted Craig. Before Dad passed. She said someone had to be realistic. He stopped. I heard a door close on his end, maybe a bedroom, maybe a hallway. Then I asked about the text to her sister. She said it was just venting. I asked if she ever saw you as family. The silence stretched between us. I did not fill it. Daniel breathed in sharply. She said family is whoever builds the future, not whoever clings to the past. I looked across the dining room at Thomas's empty chair. The past, she called it. 44 years of marriage. A son raised. A mortgage paid. Soup left on porches for sick neighbors. Christmas mornings. Hospital rooms. Dogwoods planted by hand. All of it dismissed because it did not serve the future she wanted. I am sorry, Daniel said. I should not have told you that. No, I said. I needed to know. And I did. Not because I wanted more pain, but because pain with a name is easier to set down than confusion. Over the next week, everything unfolded quietly, almost politely, which made it feel more final. Harold filed formal notices with the trustee and sent Craig Miller a written clarification that the property was not available. Daniel moved into a hotel near Richmond Road while he decided what to do about his marriage. Ashley sent one message to me, then another, then stopped after Harold replied on my behalf. Her final message was only 7 words. "You have turned my husband against me." I read it once and felt nothing sharp, only a tired understanding. Some people believe losing control is the same thing as being betrayed. On Sunday morning, exactly 10 days after Thomas's funeral, Daniel came over alone. He brought no speeches, no excuses, no flowers purchased in panic. He brought a small toolbox and asked if he could fix the loose hinge on the pantry door, the one Thomas had been meaning to repair. I let him. For 20 minutes, I sat at the kitchen table and listened to the ordinary sound of a screwdriver turning. It was not redemption. Not yet. It was not a happy ending wrapped in music and forgiveness. It was a beginning made of small, honest things. After he finished, Daniel stood awkwardly near the sink. "Dad would hate what happened," he said. I looked at the pantry door, now closing properly for the first time in months. "Your father would hate the pain," I said, "but he would be proud of the truth." Daniel nodded, eyes lowered. Before he left, he touched my shoulder. Not in a rushed way. Not like a son performing duty. Like a man asking permission to come back carefully. I let his hand stay there for a moment. After he drove away, I walked through the house alone. The rooms were still too quiet. Thomas was still gone. Ashley had not vanished from the story, and Daniel's choices would not repair themselves overnight. But the house no longer felt like a place under siege. It felt like mine again. In the study, I placed Thomas's letter in a frame and set it inside the locked drawer, not on display for visitors, not as a weapon, but as a witness. Then I opened the curtains and let the afternoon light spill across his desk. Ashley had believed the final battle would be loud, with shouting, tears, and an old woman begging to keep what was hers. She had counted on my grief to make me small. But grief had done something else. It had burned away the habit of pleasing people who had confused my kindness with permission. I did not win by humiliating her. I did not win by taking my son back like a prize. I won the moment I stopped asking anyone at that table to confirm my worth. I was Margaret Whitaker. I was Thomas's wife, Daniel's mother, and the woman who had built a life in that house with both hands. And when someone finally tried to push me out of it, I did not raise my voice. I simply stood where I belonged and let the truth open the door.